Can Ukraine maintain sovereignty over its own territory? Has Europe been left behind in the ever-changing world order? And who are the winners and losers of this conflict? These are the questions I'll be tackling today in light of the recent US-Russia peace talks. Welcome to the channel where I cover tech, geopolitics, finance, and the interplay between all three. On Wednesday, the 12th of February, 2025, a direct call between Trump and Putin opened discussions to end the ongoing conflict. 2 days later, at the Munich Security Conference, Vice President J.D. Vance made a scathing speech in Europe, lecturing its leaders about freedom and democracy. When pressed on whether Europe would get a seat at the negotiating table, General Kellogg from the American delegation flatly said no, leaving European leaders in shock and horror and surprise, although I'm not quite sure why. Now, the transatlantic alliance between US and Europe underpins the current liberal democratic world order. However, instead of informing its allies first, Trump goes behind their back to hash out some sort of deal with Putin, then informs Europe and Ukraine. A trusted partner indeed. You don't want to inform Europe? Fine, but not inviting Ukraine to the table is outrageous, especially since they still hold onto Kursk. But apparently, like Czechoslovakia in World War II, its fate is being decided without them. Ukraine thought they had a hand to play with Kursk to have some leverage at the table, but now it seems to be for naught. Trump does not care, and to be honest, neither did Biden. Biden gave the bare minimum for Ukraine to survive, but not to win. I think it will be incredibly difficult for Ukraine to maintain any semblance of sovereignty over its own land without NATO guarantees, or without some sort of guarantee from the United States. Remember, this whole thing started because of NATO accession talks. It was the carrot on the stick being dangled in front of Ukraine, but now it seems they are not getting that at all. Europe is simply too divided to be a military guarantor. I think Russia was aiming and still is aiming to pull all of Ukraine into its orbit. And if European troops were to man the new border, I don't think Russia will be too deterred by that. There is no European army. The Union is too decentralized. If a sudden attack were to happen, how long will it take Brussels to formulate some kind of plan? Some kind of unified decision? No, any ceasefire needs to have backing from the United States. And if both Europe and the US go in, then Russia can simply say that is NATO in effect, and that is not something they are willing to accept. Now, we can all make jokes about Russia and its constantly shifting red lines, but Russia did go to war over Ukraine for its NATO aspirations. I think any economic independence is all but gone for Ukraine. But if it wants to preserve political independence, it would need to be partitioned. Now, I know this is a very unpopular opinion and there's going to be war in the comments, but the reality is this. Russia took 4 oblasts from Ukraine. And in that 3 years' time, Ukraine has been unable to take them back. I think Putin will definitely not accept giving back any of the territory he has taken. Maybe trading Kherson and Zaporizhia for Kursk is possible. Ukraine can't afford to keep on fighting without external support. But Russia is able to do that, and it has been able to do that for 3 years, no matter what people say about its economy going to collapse at any time now. So should that support be cut off, the result will be total annexation. It would make sense for Ukraine to accept some sort of ceasefire with territorial losses, but the land that it can keep is free from Russian influence. I think it's very clear that America's priority now is China. China is its natural rival, whereas Russia is Europe's natural rival. Trump sees everything as a business deal, and he sees tremendous business with Russia. He's made it clear that he's interested in Ukraine's mineral resources in exchange for continued aid. Well, Russia has a whole lot more, especially since that they control eastern Ukraine where most of its mineral deposits are located. That is the one angle not being mentioned enough by the media. Yes, NATO and spheres of influence play a big part, but so is resource control, so is economics. The most industrialized regions of Ukraine are in the east, and they've been bombed to rubble, or they are currently under occupation. Russia and China serve as a backbone to this so-called new axis of disorder. America has an opportunity to peel Russia away from that. Indeed, Russia and China have overlapping ambitions in Central Asia as well as parts of Africa. Putin sees that day by day he is becoming a junior partner in that alliance, and he probably told Trump, you want to counter the rise of China? You want to control the flow of resources and supply chains? Well, let's cut a deal. You want Ukraine's resources, which I control the most of, and Russia, the biggest country on earth, has a whole lot more of that. More gas, more oil, more minerals. Don't bring the Europeans into this because they will just complicate things. Lift the sanctions, normalize relations, and let's cut a deal. Russia and China are only allies because they oppose the current Western-led world order, and it's more of a hangover of the Cold War. Now, with Trump in the White House, there's an opportunity to reset that relationship. US and Russia are worlds away. They are, in many ways, natural allies in the context of China. You have China saying that parts of Eastern Russia belong to China historically and they should be returned. So it makes sense for US to want to break this partnership from within and sway Russia to its side. Because again, many European leaders have expressed that China is not their fight and they won't be getting involved in this new Cold War and struggle over superpower dominance. We don't know who the winners of this war are yet, but it is quite clear who the losers are. The biggest loser of them all, Ukraine. 3 years of war and destruction, demographic collapse, economic ruin. In the end, their country is getting carved up between US and Russia, with no NATO guarantee, no European Union guarantee. Ukraine will be subservient to American economic interests, or they will fall back into Russia's political orbit. The second biggest loser is Europe. $144 billion spent. $24 billion more than the US, mind you. And what have they got to show for it? Deindustrialization of whatever industry they have left because of the high energy costs. Their factories are no longer competitive anymore. There's instability and inflation due to war in their backyard. And instead of relying on Russia for their energy, they now rely on the US. 48% of LNG imports come from America at a much higher price, mind you, because shipping LNG gas across the Atlantic is more expensive than simply using the existing pipelines that link to Russia. Now it's time to allocate the spoils of war, and they are not even invited to the table. Russia is obviously losing a lot too. No matter what their media says about the ineffectiveness of the sanctions, they are definitely working. But Russia is also undeniably weathering them extremely well. We keep hearing that their economy is overheating and it will collapse soon for the past 3 years, but it hasn't happened yet. Do we keep holding out and hope that this year it happens? I don't think so. It is clear that Russia is good at weathering the sanctions. It is clear that the sanctions are not having the impact that everybody thought it would. So there needs to be a different approach. I think Russia is struggling definitely. Their interest rates reflect this. But ironically, the Russian people are kind of winning. It is the oligarchs that's suffering the economic impact because they need to pay higher wages to compete with Department of Defense contracts that the Russian government is putting up. So the wealth is being redistributed from the oligarchs back to the ordinary Russian people. America is the only country that's kind of winning in all of this. Well, at least their companies are. The weapons manufacturers are getting paid. Even though the weapons are being donated, they are getting paid out of the national defense budget. America also sells large quantities of natural gas to Europe. It was all in the name of not being dependent on the enemy. Well, now it seems like the US isn't really an ally either. Europe has been robbed in all of this. Europe needs strategic autonomy, and it needs it badly. Ever since 1945, Europe has been following America's leadership, being dragged into all of the most recent conflicts, the Gulf War, Iraq, Afghanistan. But who do I call if I want to speak to Europe? There are 4 European Union presidents, not to mention the 27 member states and non-member state players like the United Kingdom. There is no unified policy. The Baltics and Poland are severely hawkish on Russia. Hungary and Slovakia, not so much. Germany seems apathetic. France is the only strong voice advocating for a united Europe, a centralized Europe. But even with war in their backyard, European leaders cannot agree to have a unified European army. Polish President Donald Tusk made it clear that that's not on the table and that's not what Europeans want, even with conflict so close to home. Negotiations have already started, but this presents Europe a chance to be a leader. It needs to propose a separate peace plan that guarantees Ukrainian territorial integrity and deters against further Russian aggression. But like I said, the European military is not ready. They do not have a unified command structure like NATO. NATO is European defense. But America, being the leader of NATO, needs to be involved. And once they are involved, then it is NATO. Russia does not want that. That is Russia's red line. They went to war over NATO involvement. That won't work. Europe has incredible economic power through the European Union. And they could have incredible geopolitical power through further unification and integration of its foreign policy and military. Europe right now is too fractured, too divided, too many differing opinions that undermine each other on the world stage. If there's any time to have a stance to separate from US leadership, it is now. But it is clear that Europe is not yet ready for that. All in all, the war ending is a good thing. I'm glad that Ukraine is able to get some reprieve that it deserves and it needs, although not in the form everybody had hoped. The alternative might have been full annexation, so this is the only realistic step forward. And on that somewhat optimistic note, Europeans, please let me know what you think. What have I gotten wrong? Am I as clueless as everybody else? Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you liked, and see you in the next one.